Better folks, Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilia here. Take a look at your tropical update for July 22nd of 2020. Brought to you by the folks over there at Pine Belt Gutters and Remodeling. Give Chris a call, he's a good dude. So take a look at what's happening across the open Atlantic. We have a little cluster that's into the Gulf of Mexico, and we've got Tropical Storm Gonzalo out there. We've got a fair amount of convection actually associated with some troughing and a little bit of shear action that's happening across parts of the central Caribbean. We'll start things off in the Gulf of Mexico, where there's a 70 to 80% chance of development as we head through the next 2 to 5 days on that little system that's kind of drifting across the central Gulf. Now, it's about to move over not only the warmest waters, but probably in an area with the most, I should say, with an atmosphere that's pretty conducive for development. So if we don't see something in the next 48 hours, I'd be very surprised before it sneaks over and toward Texas. Now, this isn't necessarily going to become some monster hurricane or anything. Most of the models keep this thing hanging out as either a tropical depression or weak tropical storm, as it's just going to run out of time, a lot like the one a little bit earlier this week that just ran ashore before it could really do anything. This one likely going to be in the same boat. They do not anticipate at this point in time for this to become a hurricane at all, but a tropical storm is in the cards. Speaking of tropical storm Gonzalo out here with wind at 50 miles an hour, gusting to 65. Your pressure is down at 1,000 millibars. This thing's now basically 1,100 miles off to the east of the Windward Islands. This one's moving west at 14. It's a pretty small storm. Because of that, even though it is going to become a hurricane, according to the forecast here, Category 1 with wind at 80 miles an hour by Friday at 1 o'clock in the morning, the thought is right now that it's probably not going to last as a hurricane for very long, because it's going to move into where that shearing action is happening into the Caribbean. And it tends to be what happens with these smaller storms is they're a little more at the whims of the atmosphere that surround them. So dry air and shear tend to beat these things up pretty good, and this thing to get beat up pretty good once it gets into the Caribbean. So let's go back to 91L into the Gulf of Mexico, where the model's taking this thing, well, kind of toward Texas. This thing's probably going to run aground as we head through the weekend, Friday night through Saturday, maybe even to Sunday. There's an outside chance that it kind of drifts around right along the coast of Texas. Now, most of these models take it in inland, which is good. That's what we want. We want it to move ashore, lose some of its juice, rain a little bit for the places that need the rain, and keep moving and move on out. There is a chance that this kind of sticks around for a couple of days, and the poor folks in Texas may get pounded with a little bit of rain, and it may lead to a little bit of flooding. Now, Gonzalo out here becomes a little more of a curiosity. Now, you can see that our lines here between all of the models are very close, relatively speaking. Not only that, but they're kind of laid right across where the National Hurricane Center was suggesting that this thing would go between now and about 7 o'clock at night on Sunday. Okay, so we're actually feeling pretty good. Not only do the models kind of agree with each other, generally speaking, but they agree with what the National Hurricane Center is suggesting. Then things get a little more interesting as we get past Sunday and we head toward the middle of next week. Now, this thing's going to get beat up pretty good. I'm going to draw a quick line on here. Now, starting about right in here. Now, this is the area where we were showing on the satellite image where there was that troughing action. That's where all the showers and thunderstorms were going. And they were kind of traveling south like this, and then they were kind of curly-cueing back around and going off to the north and east like that. That is an indication that there's a trough in here, and that's an indication that you're changing the wind speed and direction through a geographic area. Well, if you're a hurricane, a small one at that, and you're trying to get through this area, you have to battle the wind that's going one direction on one side of you and another direction on the other side of you. And I know that may feel like, well, what's the big deal, Nick? That's what a hurricane is. Wind's moving one way on one side, wind's moving another way on the other side. And while that is true, hurricanes like doing that to you. They don't like it, the atmosphere doing it to them. And so it's going to get kind of beat up as it passes through this area. So even though some of these lines take it off into kind of between the straits between Cuba and Florida, or the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba, we don't know exactly what this thing is even going to look like when it gets there. I mean, there's a pretty good chance that it's a shell of its former self, because it is so small, and it's going to be kind of the whims of the atmosphere. So you're probably going to see a lot of scary things on social media showing stuff like this. Oh my goodness, it's getting so close to the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to be a hurricane soon. Oh, look out, run for your lives. And you don't need to worry about that. Not yet, for sure, because this thing is going to get beat up pretty good right in here, right about Saturday or Sunday. And until it gets to Saturday or Sunday and it starts to kind of fight back and we see what happens with it, we're not really going to know what's going to happen. In fact, let's take us through some of the modeling here in specific. 700 millibar moisture, 850 vorticity map. Like always, the grayed out areas, there's all your dry air in here. You know, we've got ample dry air. Here's 91L moving ashore somewhere across parts of Texas. And then here's Gonzalo back over here. We'll set this thing into motion, and you can kind of watch Gonzalo kind of scrapes South America. I mean, look how far south this is. By the way, I went and did a little bit of research. This is as far south a hurricane, if this turns into a hurricane will form since 2004. Ivan was actually this far off to the south. I mean, this thing's scraping South America. Okay, so we got 91L moving ashore. But it's got to get through. Gonzalo back here has got to get through a little bit of dry air, a little bit of shear. Now, that shear, keep in mind, was right in that area. Gonzalo, now, a little further off to the south, but still, you see what happens. I mean, it just gets eaten for breakfast with this stuff. And it's basically donezo. Now, there is one back in behind Gonzalo. Now, this would either be Hannah if this thing over here doesn't turn into Hannah, or it would be Isaias. I'll probably just end up calling it Izzy because Isaias is very difficult to say correctly. In fact, I don't even think I said it correctly. But this one back here would be an interesting one because you've already had Gonzalo move through, and the shear interacts with Gonzalo, and then Gonzalo interacts with the shear, and you can kind of sort of work out a little bit of the shear that's in there, and it may open the door for the next one to just come gliding right through. And then this one, we'll have to see what happens as it ends up to the south of Jamaica as we head through the 1st of August here. There we go, 1st of August. And as we get into August, then we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens. And there's another wave back out here worth noting as well. Again, Hurricane Center, Colorado State, Penn State, who else? Basically everybody that you ask out there that does these sub-seasonal forecasts is suggesting that we're going to have a reasonably active season in the Atlantic for the tropics. So this is kind of no surprise, unfortunately. So there's a look at how things are kind of shaking out right now. We've got a couple of areas to watch. We've got Invest 91L, we've got Gonzalo, and then we've got what's back in behind Gonzalo. And we're still trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen with the last two. And the first one, we have a pretty good idea that it's going to bring some pretty decent rains to parts of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. So that's a look at your tropical update for July 22nd of 2020. Brought to you by the good folks over there at Pine Belt Gutters and Remodeling.